fun when Barry Knott and I are together fighting with each other. Yeah, I know. Yeah, it is. Okay, we'll get started, everyone. Good evening. At this time, please make sure that all your phones and other recording devices are set to mute or vibrate. Today's date is June 5th, year 2018, and the public hearing of the Stratford Zoning Board of Appeals will come to order. This is a two-phase program. First is our public speaking part, where we'll hear petitions, and after those petitions are read in, the board will have any questions. Once that is completed, if there's anyone in opposition that wants to speak or anyone in favor, we'll have an opportunity to do so. Please, everyone, speak clearly, state your name, address, and in what capacity that you are representing the petition. Afterwards, we'll recess into our administrative session, where only the board members will have an opportunity to discuss the applications and whether we're going to vote for or against the application. And please refrain from any emotional outbursts. And with that, the first petition, 271 Prospect Drive, will be rescheduled for our July 3rd meeting. Hearing that, Ms. Young, would you please give us the privilege of reading our one and only application for tonight?
That leaves us with 104 Ridge Road. Thank you. 104 Ridge Road, petition of
Fiznik Dovani.
that's what I have to say. Thank you. Seeking a waiver of the side setback for garage converted to living space without permits incidental to a single-family dwelling, hardship pre-existing since 2002.
Madam Secretary, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the Zoning Commission, that concludes my presentation, and thank you very much.
Adjourned.
Actually, for the record, Nicholas Owen, 972 East Broadway, Stratford, where I conduct a real estate business, building business, and sometimes a zoning, wetlands, Board of Zoning Appeal consulting business. I am here tonight on behalf of Mr. Fisnik Dovani for 104 Ridge Road. The petition was noticed legally, the signs were posted, and I am here in connection with that particular petition tonight. As part of your application process, we are required to send out notices to all of the adjoining property owners and those directly across the street from the subject petition. And I have the receipts of mailing and a copy of the cover letter that I sent along with a copy of the zoning hearing letter dated May 8th, 2018. By way of background, and I'm going to deviate from my normal petition presentation tonight and give you just a little bit of background on Mr. Dovani. Mr. and Mrs. Dovani are Albanian immigrants, came to this country, in 1987 and lived in Stratford, Connecticut for a couple of years. Could not speak, neither of them could speak a word of English. They went to school, they learned English, they went to trade school. Mr. Dovani has a trade, and ultimately in 2002 moved to Stratford on 104 Ridge Road. When Mr. Dovani moved to Stratford, he did not have what I would consider very capable legal counsel. Because what we are faced with is a situation where Mr. Dovani bought a house, and I am going to use the term of buyer without knowledge that there was a potential zoning violation, and that violation is why we are here this evening. Apparently what has happened sometime prior to 2002, prior to the purchase of the house by the Dovanis, the former owner converted the interior of the garage to a living space, to adjoin the living space of the main house, therefore creating a quote-unquote potential illegal zoning violation. They used that particular former garage as additional living space to the house. Now, I will submit to you that if you drove by the house now, you would see a complete house with windows in it, fully sided, with a driveway going right up against that, the old garage area, which is now part of the living space. And what I would like to do is show you from here, and I will submit for the record, and Mary, if you would be kind enough to look at what you need and then pass them out. There are some of them that are multiples, and I would like to enter those pictures in as an exhibit. And what I am presenting to you is not only a picture of Mr. Dovani's house, which is this one right in the middle, and you could see, I hope you can see this, where the driveway abuts right up against the former garage, and I am pointing to where there are two windows and complete siding around the entire house. Now, in 2002, when he purchased that, that was not the case, and I'll get into that in a minute. What was out there, as I previously indicated, was a garage door. But what nobody saw behind the garage door was the finished space. So the owner, prior owner to 2002, finished the space without permits, without coming before the Board of Zoning Appeals, without the ability to obtain a waiver. Now, I will indicate to you that in additional pictures that you see on this poster board, the house directly to, if you're facing Mr. Dovani's house, directly to the right, you will see a similar situation where a garage was converted into living space. Now that is also 5 feet away from the line. On the opposite side of Mr. Dovani's house, you will see another home where a waiver was granted for an in-law setup, which is also 5 feet from the line. You will see on 107 Ridge Road, across the street, there is the same situation right across the street from the subject petition of Mr. Dovani's house. There is another house that has converted their garage into living space, and you could see where the driveway is right up against that, and that is a 5-foot waiver situation. On the opposite side, on 91 Ridge Road, you will see two additions. One addition where a addition was built on top of a garage, and that side yard is 5 feet from the property line. And on the opposite side, you will see what I have learned from the neighbor is an in-law setup, which is 5 feet from the property line. So what I am suggesting to the commission, and what you can see by my testimony and pointing it out on the board, that the granting of this petition for a correction of a 5-foot side yard on a property is not going to materially affect the neighborhood. In fact, when I took these pictures yesterday, I had the good fortune and opportunity to speak to 3 of the neighbors that live on this street next to Mr. Dolovani. And they were very nice. They invited me into the house. They showed me what they did. They showed me how the properties are kept. They all are in love with Mr. Dolovani. They're not very, they're sad that he is ultimately going to move because he needs a bigger house because his family has grown. Now, I think what is important for the board to understand, that I would not stand in front of this board and tell you something that I didn't think was true. And in questioning Mr. Dolovani, he did not complete the interior of the former garage. What he did do, and I will point out to you when it was done, and Mr. Habansky pointed it out on his zoning comments, what Mr. Dolovani had in fact done is he removed the garage door and put in 2 windows. So we had light in that room. And only did he find out that there could be a potential violation is not from a lawyer who did a title search, because it didn't show up on a title search, not for an investigation of the land records or the building department or the zoning office to find out if any application were filed in order to justify a waiver or in order to grant the waiver, so they could have legally done what has been done on the other surrounding properties on the street. It was missed. What did in fact happen is the broker who sold the house for Mr. Dolovani questioned whether or not any waiver was ever granted, and if he appeared before a commission to have approval, because the broker realized, since it was a local broker, that there could be a potential of a side yard problem. And that's when it was discovered. And that was late in March or early April of this year. Now, Jay points out, Mr. Habansky points out in his comments, that upon looking at the Google map, it shows that there was a garage door there in 2002, there was a garage door there in 2004, and there was a garage door there in 2009. And yes, there was. We are not denying that. Mr. Dolovani's not denying it. It was something that was there, and he did, in fact, change that. However, I said it twice, and I'll say it one more time. He did not alter the space inside. It was already altered. So we're here to rectify something that should not have happened in the first place. Now, what I would like to submit for the record at this point, based on some of my comments, is a copy of the deed where you'll see that Mr. Dolovani purchased this house March 21st of 2002. I'd like to enter this in as an exhibit. I would like to also submit as an exhibit, after some explanation, some of you or all of you may have a question to say, well, if this is the case, and he's been using this property, this former garage, as living space since 2002, was he assessed as a garage, or was he assessed as living space, and was he taxed as a garage or taxed as living space all along? Now, what Jay doesn't point out in his comments, because he did not do any further research, and I'm not picking on Jay, it's not his job, it's my job. And in doing the research, and if you take a look at a copy of the assessor's cards from 104 Ridge Road, it will show that in September 1st of 2004, on a field survey, that this was assessed as additional living space, not a garage. So taxes were paid, assessments were granted, and I would like to enter these 2 exhibits into the record. And you will see on the back of one of these pages, which is very hard to see, even though I testified to it, that there was a garage door there originally. And I'd like to enter these 2 as exhibits. Again, the valuation, and I'm going to go back to 2000, so it appears that the alteration on the interior of this particular property was done sometime prior to 2000 because there was a change in the assessment, and that change was to increase the assessed value of the house because this was finished living space and not a garage. And I would like to enter this in an exhibit, and you can see where I've circled and underlined in red what I'm talking about. I'd like to enter that into the record. Further into the record, I'd like to submit a copy of the tax bill to further verify that all taxes were assessed and paid at a 2000 value, which included, we're going to call it the new room. Let's get to the crux of the matter now, because I'm sure that there will at least be a question. I've indicated to you in my preliminary remarks that this was a buyer without knowledge. In my opinion, in my assessment, that is a hardship. Should he have known? There's a possibility that he should have known, but being a, and I use this word nicely and gently because he's a great guy, being an immigrant who was learning English, who came over from Albania, does not really know all of the nuances of zoning laws or building laws anywhere. And I can point out many examples to you, but there have been many occasions, and some of the petitions I've been involved with, where someone hires a contractor, and the contractor gives them a price, and the homeowner says, "Are you going to pull the permit?" And the contractor says yes. And you assume that the contractor is also going to check if it's zoned properly for what they want to do. And what do we have? These people, including me, come before your boards and say, we have a problem. We have a non-conforming use that should have been approved, and no one ever appeared before the commission to turn around and get this thing verified or approved. That is the situation here, pure and simple. Now, I will submit to the record a copy of the picture of the finished space in that former garage. These people live very nicely. They're very neat. It's a great neighborhood. Everybody takes care of their properties immaculately. Now, this subdivision was approved, the entire subdivision on Ridge Road was approved somewhere in the late 50s or early 60s, and they are all McNeil colonials, and I'm not sure you've heard the term before. But McNeil was a big builder in this town. I had the good fortune of knowing him and doing some work with him when I was younger and he was older. But he built numerous subdivisions of these style houses up there. And over the years, what the people have done is what I pointed out to you. They've converted the garages, as in this situation. They have put additions above the garages, as this. They have gotten waivers to increase the size of their house. And Mr. Dovani had the same thing done, however, without the sole purpose of obtaining a permit, which was beyond his control at that point. And with that, I would like to also submit to the record previously what I indicated to you, that other properties that along the street and adjoining this were granted waivers for similar situations. And that comes out of the zoning records. Interestingly enough, when we filed the application, and then I can rest my case, I had looked up a Connecticut state statute. And what I would like to do is, Mary, if you would be kind enough just to pass a copy to everyone. Understand that there are a number of us in town that collaborate with each other on particular petitions. Attorney Knott and I have been friends since we were kids. I collaborate with him, with Attorney Proto, with Attorney Rosati, this was pointed out to me. Connecticut General Statutes 8-13A, non-conforming buildings, structures, and land uses. And I'm just going to read part of this into the record because I'm sure you can read it yourselves. And if all else fails, this is state law, and it certainly does apply in our opinion. When a building or other structures is so situated on a lot that it violates a zoning regulation, and this particular petition would violate a zoning regulation because of the side yard, the 5-yard side yard. The regulation of a municipality that prescribes the location of such a building or structure in the relation to the boundaries of the lot, or when a building or structure is situated on a lot that violates zoning regulation of a municipality that prescribes the minimum lot area, and when other such building or structure has been so situated for 3 years without the institution of an action to enforce such regulation, such building or structure shall be deemed a non-conforming building, and therefore it becomes legal. Now, very rarely does this happen. So in this situation, not only are we 3 years out without anybody complaining, this was done in 2002. We're 16 years out. Now, you can turn around and say, well, the violation was not complete until sometime in 2008 or 9 when he removed the garage door and put the windows in and put the siding on. We're still many years to where a violation doesn't exist. This doesn't happen often, but it happened in this case. And I implore the board to approve this application. This is no fault of Mr. Dovani. This is an error, and he deserves every consideration, in my opinion, from this board. And with that, I rest my case.
Thank you, Attorney Owen.
I'm not an attorney. I'm a non-spokesperson attorney.
Does the board have any questions?
Not attorney spokesperson.
Okay. Does the board have any questions for Mr. Owen? Ms. Young.
Mary, I'm surprised you have a question. You never have a question.
I just want to make sure I get the timeline straight. Our agenda describes the hardship side.
Ms. Young? Your button.
Your mic.
Here. Thank you. Much better. These are new for me. So once again, I just want to get my facts straight. The agenda cites the hardship as pre-existing since 2002. You've given us some various exhibits, evidence into the record, giving us other dates to choose from. Your last statement, I believe, said in 2009, when the garage door was removed, if we wanted to choose that as the date, that still is greater than the 3 years that 813A provides. So just for the record, are you modifying your hardship as cited on the agenda, and could you articulate again what is the hardship?
The hardship, I am modifying what was on the application. Mm-hmm. The application was filled out at the time where I did not have benefit of a copy of the law. However, notwithstanding that, if you take that law document and throw it out the door, which I hope you wouldn't because it's law and it's important, the hardship the violation pre-existed the ownership by Mr. Dovani of the house in 2002. The reason why I gave you different dates was to more or less solidify in all of the commissioners' minds that we are even outside of the statutory regulation of the 3-year period where no one complained. That's what would trigger it. If someone put a call into Jay Habansky's office and spoke to someone and said, we have a problem up here, and it was when the 3-year period when this was done, then there would be an issue. I don't believe that there is an issue, not only based on the facts that I've given you in my presentation, but to me there is absolutely no issue with the law. If you would keep in mind, even though the board does not have to approve a petition because other similar petitions were approved on the same street, I would like the board to keep in mind all of the petitions that were granted for the same reason, the 5-yard side yard to convert from a garage to living space. Now, in the RS4 district, which this is, I know you're aware that one side, on the living side, you have to have 10 feet. On the garage side, you can go to 5 feet, except in instances where you go above, as in this particular home at 91 Ridge Road, which is across the street. That garage sits 5 feet from the side yard, however, there's a living space addition above it. So, yes, I am modifying what I put on the application as a hardship. I hope I answered the question.
I think you told me more than I was expecting. I thought I was going to get a one sentence, instead of pre-existing since 2002, you were going to say either 813A gives me the allowance for this, or pre-existing since 2009. That's what I was just trying to capture. If we wanted to replicate, for purposes of our resolution, what is your hardship, how would you help us fill in that blank? What words would we use if you were us?
The exact same words that you just used.
So let me counter by asking Mr. Herbansky. I imagine your staff on a routine basis is faced with property owners who perhaps found themselves in a situation, they bought this that way or something, where you have to inform them about the provisions in 813A, quote unquote, the 3-year rule. If there's no enforcement over 3 years, they get to keep it if it's non-conforming to its location. Now that that's been put into the record, would this have been sufficient for your staff to negate the need for this hearing tonight?
No, I mean, when I read the general statute 813A, and obviously the statutes are up for interpretation, I believe that implies to proximity to property lines, not use. The zoning regulations say you're allowed to encroach 50% to the side setback with an attached garage as long as the space is used as a garage space. Once the use changes, that's what makes it non-conforming. It had always conformed. There was nothing to complain. If anyone complained as the garage was, the space was still a garage, there would be no violation. It was the use change, which I don't think, and I'm not an attorney, but it's the change of use within that garage is what I think does not make statute 8-13A apply.
Thank you. I have no other questions.
I would like to comment on that, if I might, Mr. Chairman. I think that Mr. Herbansky and I did discuss this, and I think he's taking a very narrow view of what it reads. When a building or other structure is so situated on a lot that it violates a zoning regulation of a municipality that prescribes the location of such building or structure in relation to the boundaries of that lot, which we are here because it's within the boundaries of that lot that they had to keep a 5-foot setback, or when a building or structure is situated on that lot violates the zoning regulation. Well, the building or the structure itself as a garage does not violate the zoning regulation. I'm sorry, yes, does not violate the zoning regulation. I agree with Mr. Herbansky on that. Where I disagree is that it is a building and a structure, and it is situated on a lot based on the conversion to living space violates the zoning regulation. So if you take it in toto, this statute, 8-13A, non-conforming buildings and structures and land uses, applies. But if you want to take this, as I indicated, and throw it out, and base your potentially, hopefully favorable decision, not to make this guy tear the place apart, on my presentation, I think I've more than met the requirements.
Mr. Owen, this particular house is being sold?
Yes, it is, sir.
Has it been sold? Does it have a potential buyer?
It is under contract, awaiting approval from the Board of Zoning Appeals to solidify this situation.
Is the buyer aware of the situation?
The buyer is aware of the situation through the broker. That's how we discovered this problem.
Because there was no way to tell if the structure was conformed to living space without somebody looking through. Like I said, the garage door was there, and you're saying it was converted to living space back in 2002. There was no way anybody.
No way to tell formally.
The board have any other questions? Mr. Hoydick?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions for Jay. Are we considering this as an after-the-fact application or the correction of a violation?
Both, I think.
It's both?
Yeah.
And the only, well, to further, the only reason he's here is because he's selling the property, and to rectify the release of the title or to get a CO, this has to be rectified.
Correct. This was not caught through enforcement or a complaint. It was, as the applicant stated, it was brought up by the buyer's, one of the
Broker,
buyer's
right.
agents.
There was never a complaint on this property.
No, I didn't think there was, but I just wanted to see what category this falls under, but apparently it falls under both, right? Okay, thank you.
Ms. Young?
I'm getting hip to the button. So just to follow up on that last question, Mr. Urbanski, can you confirm that there is no requirement that people have COs or zoning certificates of compliance to buy and sell property? If there had been, this never would have happened to the current seller, correct?
Can you repeat the question one more time? I'm not sure I
I
followed.
thought the way the question was constructed, that somehow the pending sale could be compromised by what happens tonight. And in my experience, people buy and sell property daily that have zoning violations. One can choose to buy a property, not do your due diligence, and years can pass and there is no consequence. It's people who choose to be more informed, who ask these prudent questions, who can then make an informed decision. Do I want to buy this property that comes with a zoning violation, or do I buy the competition's property? But it's not incumbent that we grant this variance that would dictate the sale of the property. That's the buyer's choice, correct?
That's correct. I mean, that's almost the same situation as how the current property owner got the property.
Right. Thank
That's
you.
how it slipped through.
Which was an error not caused by Mr. Dovani, and that's the wrinkle. Buyer without knowledge. It's unfortunate.
Any other questions from the board?
I thank you for your time.
Hearing none, is anyone here in speaking in favor of this petition? Hearing none, seeing none. Anyone in opposition? Hearing none, seeing none. Is there any, do we motion to close? Motion to close by Mr. Hoydick, second. Second by Ms. Young, she beat you to it. All in favor? Any opposed? Passes unanimously at this public hearing. Motion to close the public hearing. Motion by Mr. Hoydick, second by Mr. Petroselli. All in favor? All opposed? None? I guess we'll go right into our administrative session. Discussion for 104 Ridge Road? Well, I guess I'll start. I'm sorry. Motion to take 104 Ridge Road off the table. Motion by Ms. Young, second. By Ms. Streets, all in favor? Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay. Now, for discussion for 104 Ridge Road. Well, I guess I'll start. If there's a way that the seller, since the person has a buyer, and that's where I'm looking for right now to protect the buyer, if that person can kind of redo what should have been done, if they pulled the permit and possibly even had proof that the building's in compliance, both with electrical and whatever plumbing, I'd be inclined to be in favor of voting in favor of the petition. I mean, if not, I think the other alternative is that the current owner would have to revert back to having it being in the garage.
Correct. I think that if the board chooses to approve the application, a condition should be that a building permit be taken out and all work that was done without a permit be legalized to make sure that, as Chairman Tavares said, all the electrical is done correctly, just to make sure that everyone that's living there is living in a safe condition. And if the board chooses to deny it, it would be to pull out a building permit, also to remove the work and revert back to the garage space.
Anyone else? Ms. Young?
Mr. Tavares, it sounds like you're creating a potential motion for approval with conditions. If that is the direction you're headed, could you help me understand what hardship you might cite as your rationale for granting this?
Well, it really wasn't much of a hardship because of the fact that the person that bought that property according to Mr. Owens, that it was already made into livable space. I pretty much want to cut off any other potential buyers so that this doesn't keep getting handed down to any other potential buyers in the future. The alternative to me would, again, they would have to tear down, and either way, a permit has to be pulled. So I was thinking of the path of least resistance, that the current owner make right what was wrong, pull the permit, and make sure that whoever acquires the house would at least have the peace of mind of knowing that everything is within code and within compliance. Does that answer your question?
Not really. It explains why you think it might be appropriate to grant this variance, but I'm looking, because as you know, this is what I do for my day
Right.
job, of some hardship reason, as was offered by the representative, that is tied to the land, not tied to the people. That's part of our rationale for why we grant variances. What's unique about the property is the conditions that warrant relief from the zoning regulations. Mr. Hibansky could perhaps articulate it better than I about what is our requirements as ZBA members, BZA members, to grant a variance. Mr. Hibansky?
Sure, well, I think you pretty much hit on it, but in my staff comments, I pulled this right out of one of the legal books that I pretty much follow, which was done by attorney Ziska, I believe. It's called What's Legally Required for Zoning in the State of Connecticut, and it's in italics. It says, the authority to grant a variance may only be used with respect to a parcel of land having unusual conditions not generally encountered within the zoning district that would make development in full accordance with the regulations extremely difficult. There are some rare exemptions, which I think we've all experienced, I think last year with some other applications, although those wouldn't apply here, so I won't get into those. So it's something that's unique about the property that makes it unusually difficult for someone to say build an addition, because the lot that they purchased wasn't wide enough. So it's almost impossible for them to meet a coverage requirement or a setback requirement, or those would be some examples.
Mr. Whitty?
Yeah, I understand your standing on the hardship, but in my past history on being on these boards, if there was a gray area concerning a hardship or a prudent alternative, it's my understanding that even if the board grants it, and if no one questions it within a 15-day period, appeals it, that no matter what we grant as the permit, it stands. Is that true?
That's correct.
Thank you. Well, in that
Mr. Whitty?
case, I'm going to make a motion to approve application 104 Ridge Road. I will cite Mr. Owen and also the integrity of his client, that he did not know that there was any issue with a permit as he bought the property on 2002. If that's the hardship, I'll use it. And as a stipulation that the building department issue a CO or a compliance of, the building itself has to be issued as well before they can finalize the dwelling. That's it.
And just to make sure that I have that clear, as a condition of approval, a building permit and a zoning compliance application shall be taken out
Yes, yeah.
as a condition of approval.
As condition, yes,
For this.
yes.
I'll second it.
Second by Mr. Petroselli. We'll take are we ready for a roll call vote?
Aye.
I have a
Motion
question. Should we put a time limit on getting this done?
We could put a time period on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, as a friendly amendment. What do you think would be appropriate?
Well, if it's in the interest of the board to protect the potential buyer, you could say, as a condition of approval, building permits and zoning compliance shall be applied for prior to the sale of the property. That way, it doesn't necessarily have to be closed out, but at least it's on the building department's radar for inspecting those things, and then it can be taken care of.
Okay. Was that? Is that what you're looking for? Are you looking for a time period?
Well, I was looking for time, but in addition to that, is this thing on? Okay. In addition to that, let's say that we put a time on it as Mr. Hibansky suggested, and the sale goes through, but they find things that are not safe in the house, for example, and they can't occupy it. I would like to see everything completed before approval.
All right. You could add that in.
As a friendly amendment, please. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to make a motion to either approve or disapprove. Roll call. Are we through with discussions? Ms. Young, how say you on this application? Are you for or against?
Ms. Streets, were you voting to approve with your friendly amendment?
Yes, I was.
Nay, because you only need 4 and I'm not into it.
Ms. Young? Ms. Streets?
Yes,
Yes with condition?
with conditions.
Mr. Petroselli?
Yes, with the conditions that
Mr. Hoydick? Yes. And the chair votes yes. That's 4-1. Yes with conditions also. It passes.
Gentlemen, for your consideration.
With that, the administration session is closed. We're going to our administrative affairs. Is there anyone that wants to approve the minutes of April 3rd, 2018? Motion to approve by Ms. Young, second. Do we have a second? Second by Ms. Streets. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No. Passes unanimously. Okay, is there anything for is there a CAM review?
No.
No CAM review? Okay, moving on. Is there any comments or questions or concerns from the board? Ms. Young?
Mr. Hibansky, in our packet, we had a March 29th, 2018 memorandum. Was that something new for us, or was that attached to our minutes? I've lost track. It was from the town attorney, Alexander Floric.
Correct. So I can't remember which commissioner had requested it. It might have just come out of just general discussion, but the question was asked if inaction or not voting within the statutory time limits infers an automatic approval or an automatic denial from the Zoning Board of Appeals. The town attorney did some research. We had this actually last month, but I think that we'd gotten it late and no one really had it. I didn't have any time to read it prior. So, after reviewing it, it sounds like the town attorney says an automatic approval doctrine does not apply to the Zoning Board of Appeals. However, the attorney's office would caution that the law on this subject is somewhat unsettled, and thus the board should make every effort to comply with the statutory timeframe requirements. Town attorney cites several cases here in Connecticut since 2000. Let's see.
It sounds like good news.
It sounds like good news, and I think it's always in the board's best interests, and I think that all the boards really adhere to this one way or the other, is expeditious review of these applications to keep the agendas clear and make sure the applicants are on their way one way or the other, whether it's approved or denied. So
I have a second I'm not sure if it's a concern, but an educational moment. So using this last application for me to gain education, we heard that the standards change for setbacks if it's usable space versus garage space. If you know, what was the intent behind that standard when written? I don't know if I'm talking about decades ago or a few years ago. From the streetscape perspective, it is the same. The only thing that's different is what goes on inside, as if somehow the neighbor who might be impacted needs the additional 5 feet so as not to be impacted if people are inside, versus they can be okay if they're not inhabited. I'm just trying to rationalize what was the thinking behind it, and if you don't have an answer, maybe our zoning commission might take a look at that standard to see if it still has merit in 2018 or if it's worthy of revisiting.
Yeah, so from planner to planner, I had the same exact questions, and you can actually see it in my staff comments. I said, I questioned, what's more intrusive to the neighbor? A garage 5 feet from their property line or living space? And I could see, if you live next to a mechanic, I wouldn't want the garage 5 feet. But
that's for sure.
if you live next to party animals, I probably would prefer the garage as opposed to living space. So I actually reached out to my predecessor and bothered him in his retirement to see if he knew, and he said that he did not know, but his thought was that it was becoming exceedingly difficult to develop in the RS4 zones, primarily lordship, without the one-car garage, because most of the properties down there are 5,000 square feet. Even though they require 7,500 square feet now, they were originally divided up to be 5,000 square feet, usually 50 feet wide by 30 feet deep, and that potentially because the popularity of motor vehicles at the time, maybe there just wasn't as many motor vehicles. I'm not sure that I agreed with that, but nonetheless, that was my predecessor's point, and we see a lot. Everyone that's sitting up here, I think, has seen probably 4 or 5 of these at this point over the past couple years, of someone who takes advantage of building out a little wider than they normally would be able to by having the attached garage, and then 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years later, there's an apartment above it, or the garage has been converted to living space. And so, long story short, I don't know why, but it's certainly something that if the zoning board here feels that they'd like me to look into it a little bit further, I can do an assessment of the text and kind of see how it could be revised.
I would support if you give recommendations to the zoning commission about what changes might be timely. This member would suggest it seems timely, because as a planner, I don't get it. I'm looking at the same building, and I don't particularly care what's going on behind the wall, behind the door, behind the window. It's still America. I don't want to know. That's for them to know. So it seems timely to me. I don't know if others feel the same way. Maybe everyone wants to go home and I'll stop talking.
So you're making a motion for our administrator to seek,
I don't know if I need a motion. It's just couldn't you
No.
please, if others are willing to support my request?
And I'll keep everyone here for another minute longer.
Thank you.
And say, so if you were in favor of saying we should revisit this, would you say that, okay, we should remove the provision that allows people to encroach into side setbacks altogether, or just say that all setbacks in this particular zone can now be 5 feet?
I would not have a different standard for these garages. They should meet the same standard as the house, so that whatever goes on inside it doesn't matter. It's all conforming to the standard. I would eliminate this lesser standard for just garages, in my opinion.
Well, I'll look into it, and I can look to see what some other towns are doing, and you know, just try to dig a little bit deeper into the history of the zoning regulations here and see if I can maybe find a reason or a rationale as to why it was in place. And
More importantly, how is Gary Laudenson, if that's who you're referring to?
he had a much bigger smile on his face than when he was working.
Excellent.
But no, he's doing great. He's still mentoring next door, so that he comes in once a month to say hi when he goes over to mentor. So
Nice.
yeah.
Do I ask, Jay, but I don't think so. You don't have to make a motion to accept that.
Any other items and concerns? All right, with that, do we have a motion to adjourn? Motion? Oh. Motion by Ms. Street, second by Ms. Young.
And bravo to our sitting chairman tonight. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, everybody.